Shackelford. I have been researching medical literature, at least, on cannabis for a number of years. And in my medical practice, I've seen a number of patients who use concentrates of a variety of different extraction methods with great success for a number of different medical conditions. I also sit on the Colorado Department of Revenue Medical Marijuana Advisory Work Group, one of two physicians. And in that capacity, we were tasked and have been and will be tasked with the safety of medical marijuana, both in the growth of the plant itself and in extraction methods. The rulemaking process that we engaged in this past year, and will be starting up again next week actually, has been focused from our perspective on providing or making sure that the products that are provided to the patients in Colorado don't cause any downside, have any negative effects. So to that end, we've looked at fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, extraction methods, any sort of chemical that might impact the safety of the cannabis in any form in which it's used. Concentrates can be provided in a variety of different ways, as you all know. Butane extraction is certainly one of them, and people have used other methods which are probably less safe. CO2 extraction is, of course, another which doesn't use any particular volatile solvent. The problem here is that we really don't know much about the product that comes out with any extraction method, be it CO2 or a volatile solvent. The analyses, the first, are difficult because the reference standards are difficult to find, and it's hard to really figure out exactly how they differ. The thing that's really important here is, because we don't necessarily know what the specific impact on the cannabis is, we go back to looking at what the effects of the solvents themselves are, and we'll talk more about that in detail as this panel progresses.
So I've been a cannabis user since I was 16 years old. You can clearly see the dangers of doing that. But the one thing that was always a constant, and it's been now, I'm 64, so I've been using it for a while. One of the things that bothered me for many decades, really, was I have very sensitive lungs, and smoking would really bother me. And it was a number of years ago that I basically, for the most part, gave up smoking at all and just turned to eating, whether it be brownies or cookies or raw bud or whatever. I was eating everything. And about a year or two ago, I became what I call a tar baby. So what I do is I eat extracts, CO2 extracts, ethanol extracts, butane extracts, and I think that they're all good for you, as long as you're not using anything that's bad. So if you have dirty ethanol and you do an ethanol extract, you're going to get a dirty concentrate. If you use dirty butane, which is available cheaper than high-quality butane, then any residues that might be in there that are themselves not volatile will be left over. So it's with anything else, you know, what garbage in, garbage out, and put something good in, and what comes out is good. And just to argue a little bit with my buddy here, with my doctor, CO2 is an organic solvent that is volatile. That's why you use it. It's a 1-carbon organic solvent. Ethanol is a 2-carbon organic solvent. Propanol is a 3-carbon. Butane is a 4-carbon. Hexane is a 6-carbon, etc. So they're all organic solvents, and if they're dirty to begin with and you don't get rid of everything that was in them, then you have contaminants that you don't want to necessarily consume. So I think that's the bottom line. If you're doing any kind of extract and you've got pesticides or fungal contaminants, the fungi produce really nasty compounds, you know. So the key is start with good, clean stuff and use good, clean procedures to produce whatever you're producing, and then benefit from it.
Now, we were saying that any possible dangers that you guys perceive as coming from smoking BHO would be due to the use of inferior butane, or what we would call a bad purge, an incomplete purge, right?
Well, or if you had solvents.
If you had, for example, pesticides on your plant material, that's going to come off into that solvent. So when you evaporate the solvent, you'll actually be concentrating those things, and that's the real danger. Pesticides are typically extremely nasty in how they can affect your nervous system and potentially your immune system. So you definitely don't want to ever be consuming that, which is another reason why not only with the cannabis products you consume, but with your food in general, you should be conscious about what you're eating, because if you're not eating organically produced food, which is not always easy to do, or if you're eating hormone-treated meat, you're basically voting for that kind of process because you're buying it. If nobody buys it, nobody will make it. So it's the same thing with your cannabis as well. Know what you're doing. Have some basic understanding of reality. Learn some science and learn about your health and what you should be doing to improve your health.
Yeah, and there's so many other variables too, other than even the pesticides used or the quality of the butane used. So many other variables, even to go as far as if people are processing fresh material, but they don't know how to completely process fresh material compared to dry material, they're going to have dangers of leaving butane in. They're going to have other dangers. Dangers of having too much plant material come in. Being way too harsh on the throat. So there's just so many variables, I think.
Well, there are a couple of things that enter into this picture. One of them is whether or not residual hydrocarbons like butane are dangerous. And there isn't any evidence and I looked through the National Library of Medicine database on this, there isn't any evidence that small amounts of residual butane are problematic. Now, in high concentrates, butane or any of these volatile substances are potentially fatal. And if people do using concentrating butane in a balloon, for example, and what's the term? Inhaling it, there's another term for that. But helium, a whole different matter, but that's oxygen deprivation. Well, that's oxygen deprivation, though. And in fact, that is the point. Oxygen deprivation, when you're inhaling concentrated hydrocarbons like butane, you displace the oxygen just like helium. And, of course, the butane goes into solution in the fat cells, so it hangs around for a while. But there isn't any evidence that butane or heptane or hexane or any of these other substances are dangerous in trace amounts. So, at least according to the National Library of Medicine database. If it's there in higher concentrates, then we have a whole different discussion. The other side of this that's important is the question of smoking. Now, there is evidence that, very good evidence, that smoking marijuana does not harm the lungs. And I'm quite sure that smoking concentrates, hash oil, does not harm the lungs either. It's an irritant, but that's about as far as it goes. The thing that's really important is that as temperatures are elevated above about 400 degrees Fahrenheit, you begin to destroy many of the physiologically active cannabinoids that you find in both botanical plant material marijuana and concentrates, regardless of how they're concentrated. So there are other things to discuss with regard to smoking or heating it up beyond about 400 degrees, but they don't really, it's more a question of efficacy of its effect and its use as opposed to dangers.
So you're saying in trace amounts it's not, but what if someone is a somewhat abusive dabber? What if they're dabbing all day, every day? Does it then become an issue?
I think it depends on how much they're using, as you said, but we don't have much data on it. And so, as always, when we don't have a whole lot of data on it, it's best to err on the side of caution. Meaning, if we don't really know, and it's hard to say exactly how much somebody's using if they're consuming a given amount, and we could test this, it just hasn't been done yet. A given amount on an ongoing basis, is there any particular danger? If we don't really know, it's best to avoid something. But, as Dr. Melamede said, the way that it's produced and the quality of the materials used, in particular the quality of the raw material that you're extracting from, has a huge impact on the final product and its safety.
And also, we got to take into account that this, the technique for making BHO has been around since about the year 2000 in Canada, and the way everybody learned about it in the U.S. was over the internet. So people have been dabbing and dabbing heavy for decades, and there haven't been any real problems reported yet.
Well, I actually know someone who had a problem that was dab related. She's actually here in the audience. If she was, I'd like you to just say real quick. She had an issue where she was dabbing and she had to be taken to the emergency room, and almost could have had a fatal accident. So I would just like her to really briefly, in a few, That's important. Thanks, Jesse. So what she said was, basically this flap of skin that separates your esophagus from your trachea in the back of it was inflamed, and this can happen from irritants, it can happen from infections, it can happen from heat sometimes, and I'll let the doctors address this because I'm not a doctor, but if it happened to her, that means it could happen to someone else, and if it was the butane that caused it, then this is a possible danger, because if she hadn't been taken to the hospital quickly enough, she could have died. And if this is something that isn't particular just to dabbing and it was just a fluke thing, then that's great. But if this is something that can happen to a lot of people on a regular basis, then it's something that we need to raise awareness about, because the first time some poor person does a dab and drops dead, it's going to be very bad for the whole scene and for the legalization scene in general. So, doctors, would you guys like to address this?
I'd like to, because I think it's highly unlikely that that had anything to do with the butane. Cannabis itself is an anti-inflammatory, so there had to be something else going in there that was pretty nasty with respect to how her body responded to it. And, it could be, there are people who are developing allergies who work in the grow rooms. So she might have had a particular allergy to something that was concentrated. It could have been contaminants in the product itself. I'd say the least likely of all was that it had anything to do with the butane. And we are making concentrates from all of these other things. Ethanol is itself a poison. The amount that you'd ever have left over is never significant enough to have a real effect on you. And I think the situation with butane is very comparable to that. You're not going to get enough butane by whatever is left over, from what I know, to ever be a problem. And it does evaporate pretty easily. Just heat it up, even with boiling water. You're not going to necessarily alter other things, but you would tend to evaporate most of that butane.
Yeah, the temperature of the volatile, the evaporative temperature of butane is extremely low. And so if you're heating it up and it's vaporizing or being burned, that butane is pretty much gone. Any residual would not be a problem. So I completely agree with Dr. Melamede that there may well have been other concentrates, as we said earlier, possibly pesticides or herbicides or something else that were concentrated by the extraction method. And maybe it was a function of just temperature. You can actually get epiglottitis from coffee if you drink it or swallow it incorrectly. So, there are a lot of different things it could have been. I very much doubt that it was the butane itself, or probably the concentrate itself at all, but something else, some other factor. So I don't think that necessarily is a negative about using butane extracted concentrates.
I've had extracts that people have given me that I literally threw in the garbage. So it really does depend on what you're getting and how it was made, whether it was made from, bud or crap leaves that had no trichomes. I mean, you got a whole spectrum there of what people are going to do to try to make money, unscrupulous people who we don't want to support in any fashion. If I can make one other comment, I periodically do smoke the tar, as I call it, and what I found to be very effective is if you have just like a small pipe and you got a nice clean screen, and it's not a pipe that so it's a glass pipe, it's all nice and clean, and if you just leave the carburetor open, it's got especially a big carburetor, you leave that carburetor open and you put the lighter on it, take one big hit, and it will all melt and evaporate without really burning because you have enough air coming through it. And I find that to work very effectively and to be actually quite mild on the throat because you're just bringing in so much air, and it's very effective.
Great. Well, it's very comforting to know that you guys, I feel a little more at ease that it wasn't necessarily dabbing that did that to her. It was just some factor that